All right, what's going on, everyone? Seth here, registered dietitian. And there's lean, there's really lean, then you have shredded, and then you have Rich Gaspari. I had to create a whole new class of conditioning to describe what Rich looked like because when he competed back in the 80s, no one had seen what he presented on stage before. The first guy with really shredded glutes who also had density. Now, Rich felt like he had to come up with an X factor because he was facing the most dominant bodybuilder of his era and really of all time. If you think about it, Lee Haney, 8-time Mr. Olympia, Rich was competing against him. Now, Rich really couldn't compete with the size and the symmetry of Lee Haney, so he had to come up with some other competitive advantage, and for him, it was conditioning. So how did he do it? How did Rich get shredded glutes on stage for the first time ever and give Lee Haney a run for his money in a few competitions? Let's dive in and see what we can find out. Well, for starters, Rich was hyper meticulous about his nutrition. He rejected the idea that you could eat intuitively and come into the show in the shape that you would want. He was one of the first bodybuilders that I can recall who truly tracked and counted using a scale to the gram how many carbs, proteins, and fats he was taking in. And speaking of macros, another idea that Rich rejected was the idea that was very popular back in the 70s and 80s that bodybuilders should eat low-carb diets or no-carb diets, especially when preparing for a show. Rich followed a 40-40-20 split with his macros, so that's 40% carbs, 40% protein, and 20% fat. Interesting, that ratio became the base of what was called the zone diet by Dr. Barry Sears, which came out in the mid-90s. And that was kind of the fad diet of the 90s. The zone diet, it was supposed to optimize your hormones. I feel like every diet says it's going to optimize your hormones, but maybe that's just me. That's probably a rant for another time. Rich actually commented on this later on and thought that it validated his theory that 40-40-20 was a really effective way to go about things. Now, something else that Rich was very in tune with was his sensitivity to food. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, the quality of whey protein supplements wasn't the best. Some reports say that protein concentration in those supplements was only around 30%. And there was a lot of filler, a lot of lactose, a lot of extra sodium, and just a bunch of junk you really didn't want in your whey protein product. So a lot of bodybuilders experience bloating and indigestion when they consume those products. So Rich rejected whey protein and instead used egg protein, which for him digested a lot better. Rich also really rejected the idea of eating wheat products, and likely what he was catching onto there was a gluten sensitivity. Most wheat products contain gluten, and if you are sensitive, they would certainly cause some indigestion, bloating, and water retention, certainly things you don't want in a contest prep situation. In fact, I have a list of no-go foods that I give my clients for the final week of competition prep, and gluten is on there because even if you don't have a severe sensitivity, even a mild sensitivity can cause a little extra water retention, a little inflammation, and sometimes that can be the difference between winning and losing in these competitions. Now, Rich also had a really dialed in peak week protocol. Instead, it wasn't a week, it was about 10 days for him. Instead of just cramming in as many carbs as possible the day or two before the show, he took a full 10 days to go through his protocol. Days 10 through 5, he would deplete carbohydrates, aiming for carbohydrate supercompensation when he added them back in. The idea there being that when you're depleted, the body will overcompensate or supercompensate in its ability to store more carbs when you decide to add carbs back in. So the Monday of the show week, he would start adding in carbohydrates all the way to Thursday, and then he would take Friday and Saturday, depending on how he looked. He would add in more carbs if he was flat, and he would hold carbs back if he was looking nice and full. So he gave himself a lot more time than some bodybuilders do right before a show when you can't make up any time at that point. So all this rigor and detail led to Rich being the most shredded bodybuilder of his era and really moving the field forward when it came to conditioning standards. You look at guys in the 90s and of course going on to the 2000s and today, and shredded glutes are a lot more commonplace. But someone had to break the 4-minute mile and someone had to come in with shredded glutes, and that person was Rich Gaspari. If you enjoyed this breakdown, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.